Olga was never needed by her mother, Zhanna, from the moment of her birth. She treated her like a familiar object in the apartment. Whether she was there or not, it made no difference to her. Zhanna constantly argued with Olga's father, and when he left her for his legal wife, she completely lost her composure. He left, didn't he? So, he wasn't planning to abandon his mess from the start. She wore out all my nerves, lied to me, screamed into the phone receiver. And now he left me with his brat. I'll throw her out the window or leave her at the station with the homeless. Olga plugged her ears and quietly cried. She absorbed her mother's lack of love like a sponge. I couldn't care less what you do with your daughter. I even doubt she's mine. Goodbye, Roman, the girl's father, replied on the other end of the line. Zhanna, as if gone mad, hastily threw the girl's clothes into a bag, tossed the documents in there as well, and picked up 5-year-old Olga and put her in a taxi. But I'll show him, I'll show all of you, was spinning in her head. In a haughty voice, she gave the taxi driver the address where she needed to go. She intended to leave the girl with Roman's mother. Mrs. Nina lived outside the city. The taxi driver didn't like the arrogant young lady who rudely answered the frightened girl's questions. Mom, I need to go to the bathroom, Olga said, shrinking into herself, not expecting anything good from her mother. And indeed, upon hearing her daughter's need, Zhanna snapped at the girl so sharply that the taxi driver itched to slap her. He himself had a granddaughter about the same age, and his daughter-in-law would blow dust off her, let alone raising her voice. Endure it, you'll turn into your intelligent grandmother. Zhanna turned away from her daughter and leaned against the window. Her nostrils flared with anger. Easy there, Mommy, or I might just drop you off and take the girl to child services. What? Just shut up altogether. Who asked you to be the defender of little girls? I could file a complaint against you myself, saying you were suspiciously eyeing my daughter and making indecent proposals to me. Who do you think they'll believe more, some taxi driver or a scared, teary-eyed mother? I raise my daughter as I see fit, so zip up your lip and keep quiet. The man clenched his jaws. It's better not to get involved with such a crazy person, it's not worth the trouble, even though I feel sorry for the girl. An hour and a half later, they arrived at their destination. Wait here, I'll be quick. Zhanna turned away and immediately heard the taxi driver sharply accelerate. You'll walk from here, you snake, came from the car's interior. The girl spat and cursed. What a jerk. She grabbed her daughter's hand and quickly walked into the front yard, kicking the gate open with her foot. Take her. Here's your treasure. Do whatever you want with her. Your son gave the green light himself, and I don't need her. Zhanna barked like a dog with her rough, hoarse voice and, turning on her heels, ran out of the house. Mrs. Nina looked at her in bewilderment. Mommy, don't leave, the little girl cried bitterly, with a sob, smearing tears all over her dirty cheeks with her fists. The girl broke away and ran after her mother, who had already stepped out onto the street. Leave me alone, go to your grandmother, live with her now, Zhanna shouted, trying to pry her daughter's fingers off her plaid skirt. Curious neighbors started peering out onto the road. Mrs. Nina, grabbing her heart as best she could, caught up with her granddaughter, who was crying at the top of her lungs. Come, dear, let's go, my precious little berry, she said tearfully as tears streamed down her wrinkled face, knowing nothing about the child. Roman didn't see fit to mention the illegitimate child. I won't hurt you, don't be afraid. Do you want some pancakes with sour cream? I have some, the woman said affectionately, leading the child towards the house. At the gate, Mrs. Nina turned around and saw Zhanna catch a passing car and drive away, leaving nothing but clouds of dust behind. They never heard from her again, but Mrs. Nina gladly took back her granddaughter, considering her a godsend. She never doubted for a moment that she was her own, as she resembled little Roman so much. I'll raise you, Olga, I'll put you on your feet, I'll give you everything I can with all my strength. And she raised her granddaughter. With love and care, she escorted her to first grade. Time flew by in the blink of an eye. Now she was already in the 11th grade, soon to graduate. Olga grew up into a real beauty, a kind and sensitive girl, intelligent and well-read. She dreamed of getting into medical school, but for now, college was her only beacon. It's a pity that Dad doesn't want to acknowledge me, the girl sighed, hugging Mrs. Nina. But in the evenings, they loved to sit on the terrace steps and watch the sunset. With trembling hands, the woman stroked her granddaughter's silky hair, not knowing what to say. Her son Roman flatly refused to take part in raising his daughter. He had reconciled with his first wife, and their shared son, whom he adored, was growing up. He despised and didn't love Olga, and when he visited, he tried to belittle her at every opportunity, calling her names. "You're the scoundrel yourself." Mrs. Nina couldn't hold back anymore. "You only come to me on pension day, begging for money, while you and your wife work, too. But with your mother, you're scraping the bottom of the barrel? Leave, Roman, and don't come back anymore. Better not at all than like this." "So that's how you speak, Mom?" "Fine. You'll die, and I won't even come to bury you," the man said, shouting at his son Vadim, who was teasing Olga outside the house. He sat him in the car and drove off, casting a hateful glance at the girl. Since then, he really didn't come. "God will judge you, Olga," Mrs. Nina replied and got up. "Let's have a cup of tea before bed and sleep. Tomorrow you're getting your diploma." Summer passed quickly. It was time to send Olga off to the city to study. "We can't manage by ourselves. I'll ask our neighbor Victor to take us to your dorm with our suitcases." Mrs. Nina herself was in a hurry to get to the city. Her health hadn't been very good lately. It was time to settle one issue while there was still time. Outside the dormitory, Olga hugged her grandmother for a long time. "You're my joy. Study, that's the most important thing, because in the future, you'll only be able to rely on yourself. I'm old, decrepit already. How much longer do I have?" Olga suppressed the tears welling up inside her. "Stop it, Grandma, you're not old, you're an elderly woman, in the prime of your life." Mrs. Nina smiled at her granddaughter. After saying goodbye to her, she got into Victor's neighbor's car and asked him to take her to the notary office. The matter was settled, and with a calm heart, the old lady returned to her village. Olga visited her grandmother every weekend, worried about her health, studied hard, and dreamed of graduating from college with honors and entering medical school. She was sure that with her knowledge, she could prolong her grandmother's old age. Then the girl started visiting less and less. She fell in love with her classmate Alexander. The guy turned out to be decent, also a good student, and planned to go to college. Mrs. Nina was only happy for her granddaughter. After graduating from college with a red diploma, the young couple got married. They were only 20 years old. At the modest wedding feast in a cheap cafe, the only guest from the bride's side was her grandmother. "For me, you are not only my beloved grandmother, but also my mom and dad in one person. All these years you've given me the warmth of your soul and the love of your kind heart. You took care of me, worried, raised, fed, clothed, and shod me. You." Olga's voice trembled, tears filled her eyes. "You gave me a home, a real warm home. I love you, Granny, thank you for everything." Olga knelt before her grandmother and hugged her tightly. She was grateful to her for everything and couldn't imagine a world without her beloved Granny. The guests were touched and nearly cried along with the bride. "Stand up, Olga, it's uncomfortable," Mrs. Nina whispered shyly. Her heart swelled with pride. "What's uncomfortable about it?" Alexander said loudly and seated Mrs. Nina next to him. You are now the main member of our big family. Welcome. The young man gestured with his hand towards his extensive family. Toasts for the happiness of the newlyweds and the health of Mrs. Nina, who had raised such a wonderful girl, resounded throughout the evening. Soon Mrs. Nina fell ill, as if she had fulfilled her duty and now could rest. Olga and Alexander took turns taking care of her, shuttling between the city and the village, combining it with their studies at the institute. One day, she firmly took her granddaughter's hand and said, "When I'm gone, vultures in the form of my son and daughter-in-law will swoop in, and you must stand your ground against them. I wrote a gift deed for you several years ago. It's all with the notary, certified and legally binding." "Grandma, don't say anything. You didn't have real parents, and I did my best to take care of you. Soon I'll leave this world, and I want to do so with a peaceful mind, knowing that you have your own home, your own roof over your head. Sell it with Alexander and buy an apartment in the city." Olga burst into tears, not knowing what to say. A lump in her throat prevented her from speaking. After that conversation, with good and conscientious care, Mrs. Nina lived for another year and a half, and then quietly passed away in her sleep, without suffering. As she had warned, after 40 days, her father showed up from the city with his family. "Vacate the house," Roman said bluntly. "As long as my mother was alive, you were allowed to live here. She's gone now, so get out." At first, Olga was stunned, looking at the contemptuous face, at his wife, whom she had never seen before, at her brother, chewing gum and inspecting their grandmother's house. In his mind, he was already calculating how to persuade his parents to sell it quickly and buy him a car. It might not be a fancy one, but it would be his own, and he wouldn't have to beg his father every time he wanted to take the girls for a ride. Alexander came back from the store and stared at the uninvited guests. "Who's this now? Bringing more riffraff here?" Roman shouted. Alexander walked past him and calmly placed the bag of groceries on the table. "I'm her lawful husband." "And who are you? I don't recall ever meeting you." Roman flushed with anger. "Both of you, get out," the man snapped, pointing to the door. "First of all, on what grounds such rude tone? Secondly, how dare you say get out? Olga is the rightful owner here. Want me to show you the deed of gift?" Alexander looked mockingly at the would-be father-in-law. "What deed of gift?" Roman asked, almost stuttering. "Roman, this snake has poisoned your mother somehow. We need to take them to court," his wife urged him. "I won't leave it like this. I'll prove that you're not my daughter or my mother's granddaughter." Roman shook the air with his fists. "Pack your bags, ragamuffin. We'll do everything to make sure you don't live here," his stepbrother growled through his teeth. The prospect of losing the car made him even more bitter. They left, leaving emptiness behind. Olga sank to the floor, covering her face, and cried into her hands. Why are they like this? What did she do to them? Father never even brought her candy throughout her childhood, and now he wants to take away her home. Do they live poorly? Or have nowhere to live? "Alexander, this is all I have left from Grandma," Olga said through tears. Alexander decisively lifted his wife from the floor and hugged her tightly. "Tomorrow, I'll post an ad to sell the house, otherwise they won't back down and will continue to stress themselves out. And don't argue. Remember, Mrs. Nina herself often said that we should sell the house later and move to the city." "Yes, I just didn't think we'd have to sell it so soon. This is where I spent all my childhood." The house sold quickly. Well-off buyers were found who had always dreamed of a country house. They didn't even haggle. The estate was huge, with fruit trees planted, not far from the road. The windows of the house overlooked a pine forest, and in the depth of the garden stood a wooden gazebo entwined with grapevines. The solid brick house appealed to the new tenants. Olga and Alexander bought a cozy modest apartment closer to the city center. Soon, they were expecting an addition to their young family and rejoiced immensely. Their child was cherished and beloved. As Olga went to sleep, she mentally addressed her grandmother. "Thank you, my dear. You gave me life. Life. Life."